Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radioastronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind the attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney, the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal.
Have your devices just randomly stopped working? Are you having IT trouble? Not to worry, Mead's PC Repair Shop can help. We also offer IT support too, including website hosting. We are now also offering full event management services. To find out more, contact our friendly customer service team who will gladly help in any situation. Just call 276-880-8900, or if you prefer, you can stop by our shop at 1089 St. Clair Street, Oakwood, Virginia, 24631 by appointment only, or by visiting the website at meadspcshop.com for more information. Thank you.
Well, I hope everyone's having a great night. Since the heat waves are moving on and everything's kind of cooled down around here, I feel a lot better. Well, tonight, our special guest is Hayley Ramsey. Hayley was born and raised in a small town in Texas. Hayley is now a world traveler, a college student studying archaeology and astronomy, and she's an upcoming author and has been to many different sites with archaeologists, anthropologists, and researchers like herself to study ancient past. This is going to be a good one, folks. Let's see what this young whippersnapper knows about all these ancient places. It's my honor to introduce the amazing Hayley Ramsey. Thank you, Hayley, for coming on the show tonight. It's an honor to have you on.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to get you on here because when it comes to ancient civilizations and sites and so forth, it's always fascinated me.
Oh, me too. I'm excited to get to share the information that I've acquired throughout my travels and personal research, because some of it's not something you really get to hear unless you visit these sites or know people that have visited these sites.
Yeah, that's true. Well, to start off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, how did you get involved with archaeology and astronomy? And also tell us about your upcoming book that you got working on.
Right. So I got into archaeology. Actually, there was kind of a gateway for me, and that was reading a book that is very famous called Gone with the Wind. And when I read this book, Gone with the Wind, it made me realize that civilizations can have a high point. They can seem golden. They can be incredible civilizations, and they can fall so quickly. And so the Civil War really showed me that. And so from that point on, I was just so obsessed with history. I went back farther and farther and farther. Next, it was the Mayan civilization that fascinated me. And then after that, it was European civilizations that existed in even more ancient times that really fascinated me. But ultimately, what really got my attention, too, was the story of the Knights Templar. And the story of the Knights Templar is a story that goes back thousands and thousands of years to the time of a man called Jesus Christ. And so that really brought me into medieval history, and I wanted to know what it was they were protecting, fighting for, etc. And that ultimately led me to the Sacred Feminine, which is what I'm writing a book about now. And that book will be published by Adventures Unlimited Press in the spring, and it is called The Bringers of Life, The Cosmic History of the Divine Feminine. And so ultimately, my journey started with Gone with the Wind, a book and a very famous movie that was revolutionary in the film industry, but it ultimately was a gateway for me to go back into a deeper past than I ever imagined I might be interested in.
Okay. Well, that's great. I can't wait to read it and get a copy of it. So can you explain to everyone what a archaeologist is, what you do, and an astronomer, so that way everybody get an idea where we're going to go down this rabbit hole.
Yes, absolutely. So archaeology, I eventually got into because I wanted to pursue a degree that had to do with history. I wanted a job that would allow me to get paid to travel the world, or at least have, my travels paid for. Archaeology is not something to get into if you want to make a lot of money, but if you're passionate about history, I would recommend it. And so I got into archaeology because I realized I don't want a degree in history. I don't want to stand in a classroom and teach I want to be on site making discoveries, be hands-on teaching these things to people that come to see the site. And so that's when I realized archaeology was the way to do that. And archaeology, by definition, is the study of past human civilizations. A lot of people, when I tell them I'm an archaeologist, they start thinking, oh, they immediately say something about digging up dinosaur bones, and that's not the case at all. That's paleontology. That's the study of bones. And I don't dig up dinosaur bones. I don't dig up human bones in most cases. I mean, it certainly can happen, but typically archaeologists study the way that people lived. They study the artifacts, they study the environment, they study the structures, and by this, we call this the archaeological record, the things that are unearthed. The archaeological record gives us the ability to put together a story that can be sometimes very accurate, and sometimes we really don't have a clue. But all we can do is try to put together a story based on the archaeological record. Now, astronomy, of course, is the study of the stars in the heavens, the planetary bodies, anything that revolves around, well, I say that, but anything that has to do with the cosmos. Of course, we live on Earth that revolves around the sun, and so anything relating to the cosmos, planetary bodies, stars, anything existing beyond Earth has to do with astronomy. And astronomy, people get confused with astrology, talking about horoscopes, these types of things, but astrology is completely different. It has no scientific methodology. And so when we talk about archaeology, that does have a scientific methodology, just like astronomy. We have methodology to proving or disproving certain theories in the realm of astronomy. So astronomy really pertains more to physics and to the hardcore science of everything beyond planet Earth, essentially. And so astronomy, to me, is very important. That's my minor in college. It's actually astrophysics. And astrophysics can tell us a lot about what's going on outside of our Earth, because there's so much. We think that there's so much to discover on Earth, but there's so much to discover outside of Earth, and it's just endless. And it's the final frontier. There is so much that we can discover that is existing out there that we have no idea is even there. And there's so much continuously. For those that aren't familiar with the Big Bang happened, and it's still happening. And the Big Bang actually is the continual expansion of the universe, because our universe is in a constant state of expansion. Therefore, we are constantly having new territory to cover forever and ever. We will never run out of space, essentially, to discover and to study. So astronomy and archaeology to me are important because the ancient people, they didn't have distractions. They didn't have something to keep them busy. Once the sun went down, that was the focus of their night. They were seeing the stars every day, every night, every morning. They would see the planetary bodies, and they connected with them in such a way. They chose to build sites in alignment with some of these planetary bodies. And so this became known as archaeoastronomy, which is the building of sites to align intentionally with astronomical happenings, with astronomical events in the heavens. And so archaeoastronomy is one of my really big interests in the realm of archaeology. And that is how I got into it. And that's kind of a little bit about what archaeology is and what astronomy is.
Awesome. Well, what was the first site that you investigated as a researcher?
Well, that's a good question because, any of us can be researchers. Any of us can go to ancient sites. And I went to Chichen Itza. That wasn't my first site going to, but that was the most important to me that I recalled on my first pilgrimage to the Mayan sites in Mexico. And when I went to Chichen Itza, this is the whole reason I went on this trip with other professors, doctors of archaeology. I went on this trip because I wanted to see Chichen Itza. It's magnificent. It's the most beautiful pyramid, I think, in the United States, or in North America, really, because we have pyramids in the United States. We have pyramids in Cahokia, these mound pyramids, at Aztlan in Wisconsin, and even down in Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee. They're all over the place, and there's many more I'm not mentioning, but I think it's the most beautiful stone-built pyramid, and it was very, very, very hard to design something like this, because when they built it, they had to take into consideration if anybody's seen it on equinox or solstice, I can't remember which holiday, I think it's equinox, it shows a serpent bouldering down the side of the stairs when the sun is setting, I believe. And so this engineering feat, no matter what day it was on that it did this, is so significant because the fact that our ancient ancestors had the ability, the engineering technology to do this and the knowledge to do this was so significant. And so to me, I go here, and it's kind of one of the first things that sends the gears in my head to start turning and start putting things together in the world of archaeology and ancient people. And so that was very significant to me. It was not the first site that I'd gone to. I actually went to a place called Yashima in Mexico, and that's where we had an open excavation occurring. And there's continuous studies here. And Yashima is a small Maya village out in the jungle. And the people there, the younger people speak Spanish. The older people speak Maya. So if we were speaking to the elders, we had to translate with the younger Spanish speakers. And they still live in mud huts with thatched roofs, grass thatched roofs. And the people are so kind. I mean, there's no danger. Everybody that heard I was going to Mexico told me, oh, be careful, be so careful, watch out, you know. But the worst thing that could happen to you in this small Maya village that we went, stayed, and worked in and researched in, someone might say buenos dias to you, you know, in the morning. That was about the worst thing that could happen to you. But it was a wonderful place. The people were so kind, so humble, so giving. You know, you walk into the village and you say hi to somebody, and next thing you know, you're a relative. And so everybody was so kind. And that really was important to me too, because when you're going to ancient sites, you want to make friends with the local people because they can tell you things that you might not ever hear from scientists, from archaeologists. These are things that you might only hear from the culture itself. And so it's very important to go to places like this and on occasion go off the beaten path and talk to people, you know, that you might not normally talk to. So as a researcher, I can definitely say the contact you have with those people within the culture is very significant. And that's one of the things that really inspired me to want to dive deeper into different cultures and to understand these things. So Chichen Itza was what really led me onto this journey that I went on to. But there are so many significant sites I've been to around the world that it's hard to just say that that was the beginning, because it wasn't just the beginning. You know, there's just so much going on here that every day I'm inspired by something new. Every day something new grabs me and just totally takes me on a whirlwind trip, and I think, oh my gosh, everything that I thought that I knew as a researcher and investigator is turned upside down, because we make new discoveries every day. We can't definitively say, you know, anything really in the world of archaeology just because we didn't exist in that time. We weren't there to say, oh yeah, this is absolutely right. So every day there are new discoveries that change what we think we know. And that's what's so exciting about it, because every day we're discovering new things. There's new information, new evidence being brought to light. And that's what really, really keeps me going in this world of archaeology.
Wow. Well, I know you mentioned the serpent. What do you think, or have you found evidence of what the significance is with the serpent with so many cultures and ancient cultures throughout the world?
The serpent, that's actually going to be, after this book that I'm writing right now comes out, this will be my next project, is a book about the serpent. And it's actually found me in my research. I didn't find it, it found me. And it really struck me as something exciting, because a lot of people don't know that in North America, we have, just like I mentioned, there are pyramids here that nobody knows about. There are many effigy sites and many other places people, Americans, don't know exist here. Just like Ohio. In Peebles, Ohio, Adams County, there is the Great Serpent Mound. And the Great Serpent Mound is a ginormous, above-earth, earthen mound structure. It is an earthwork that resembles a serpent, contains astronomical alignments, not only with the sun and Venus, but also with the moon. And so this is very important, because Serpent Mound was clearly a place of gathering, a central place of gathering for the people in this area. And it was inhabited for several, probably going back to, we know for sure, Serpent Mound existed probably 800 BC, I want to say, is the earliest carbon date that has been discovered and released. But, you know, the serpent goes back much farther than 800 BC. We see around the world, not just in North America, but in Central, South Americas, and in Europe and in Asia, everywhere, the serpent is revered as being sacred, because the serpent shed its skin. And when it shed its skin, this is a form of rebirth. And this is why it became such a sacred symbol of rebirth. And the snake itself, the ancient people associated to be goddess or a symbol of Mother Earth because they could not identify a male snake from a female snake. Because of the anatomy of the snake, you can never tell if it's a female or a male unless it's mating season and you see them together. So it's really difficult to identify a male snake from a female snake. So our ancient ancestors, for the most part, probably assumed they were all females. And so this is why it became associated with the goddess, and in several situations, and most famously in the Bible, in the book of Genesis.
Okay. Are you still there?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. You just cut out real quick. I'm not used to people just cutting out that quick. You caught me off guard with that.
Oh, sorry. I apologize.
Oh, no, no, that's fine. I spoke with Dennis Stone, and I know you know him, the owner of the American Stonehenge. Do you think that site is a megalithic site? And if so, can you also explain to people what shoot, I can't even talk tonight, megalithic site is? Blah, blah, blah.
Yes. So, of course, I'm very familiar with Dennis Stone. He's one of my good friends. And we share research with each other constantly, and we're always learning new things. So America's Stonehenge was one of my biggest, one of the things that I really wanted to do. And the fact I got to go there was kind of last minute, but really wonderful. I've been wanting to go there for years. And so when I got there, it was absolutely a megalithic site, no doubt about it. So, mega means multiple, really. And lithic refers to the lithic era, to the lithic, we're referring to the rock people, the rock era, when things are being built made of stone. And so when we say there's a monolith standing here, when we're referring to a monolith, mono meaning one, we're referring to one lith, one rock structure, one stone that is erected, and a monolith typically stands alone by itself. It is this lonely stone that has been erected by people for a purpose. Megalithic sites are built by the people from these lithic eras. So from the Neolithic era, for example, and it's important because people don't realize the extent of the history, not only in America, but worldwide. People think that cultures are dumb. They think we say Stone Age people, and we act like we're better than them, like we're much more smart than, we're smarter than they were, and we have much more knowledge than they might have had. But this isn't the case because these people were so connected with the earth. They didn't have everyday distractions, and they connected with the earth. They connected with the heavens above, and this is what gave them the knowledge. When you sit outside and you study the earth, you study life, you study these things long enough, that's when we start to gain knowledge of how things work, of systems. And that's when we gain this new knowledge that allows us to build these sites. And they occur frequently throughout Europe, these ancient megalithic sites that we get excited about, like Stonehenge in England. And that was built to track certain cosmic events, just like America's Stonehenge, right here in the United States, in Salem, New Hampshire. And it's really, really an interesting site because it's not what you find in the United States. Now there are people that have found these sites. They're hiding them from us, and they're not telling us, because it would be really great to be able to go and look at other sites like this. Because what I have not found anywhere else in the United States is a table that resembles the one at America's Stonehenge. The only other places I've found tables that resemble this are in the Middle East, Mediterranean, in this area. And so it fascinates me to no end because it implies there was a culture, a seafaring culture, that made it to North America and built these things. And the reason being, in the world of archaeology, you have, let's make this comparison being like fruit. If we have two apples and we have a banana, clearly the banana does not fit the archaeological record. It does not fit the apples that we've been finding. It's a fruit of a different kind. And so in the world of archaeology, when we find the banana, the one thing that doesn't fit in with the rest of the fruits, rest of the findings, then we have to think, how did this get here? and why? And so that's what leads us into the next part of archaeology, which is going to the reason that this object was placed where it was and who placed it there and when. So it becomes very, very difficult sometimes to establish barriers between cultures, barriers between countries and cultures, because we have no barriers. We have no walls breaking down, North America from the ocean, from other continents. So people that were getting on boats, if they made it over here, they made it here, and they came inland. There was nothing to keep them from coming here. And so that being said, that opens up a whole another door of possibilities in the archaeological world. And it's controversial because modern day academics don't want to talk about it. They just want to pretend like it's just not possible. And sadly, in the world of archaeology, I have learned that it really has nothing to do with the science. It really has nothing to do with the geology, with the hardcore evidence that's presented to us. What it really has to do with, it seems to be, is people's agendas, their theories. And when certain things don't exactly fit those theories, they get thrown out. And then people just start saying, oh, that's a hoax. That's not real. That's fake. So why is it fake? Is there any scientific evidence saying it's fake? Well, no. But people just don't want to even look at these things because they just automatically want to push it aside. And that's one thing that has happened with many artifacts here, one being the Kensington runestone that I went and saw last week in Alexandria, Minnesota, but also with the Decalogue stone that was found in Ohio in the Newark, near the Newark earthworks. And I just saw this the other day, and this stone has Paleo-Hebrew inscribed on it, and it has the Ten Commandments inscribed on it. There have been a number of out-of-place artifacts that have been found here. There's been a number of bananas, in my analogy, that have been found amongst many apples. And so it's really, really interesting to see where we might go and continue to learn about the people, the cultures that shaped North America and the native societies that already exist here. And it's never ending. It is just so vast. So there's so much to say about megalithic sites found around the United States. And they're found all throughout New England. And they're found, everywhere. So it's just, they're all over Europe, all over Asia. And now we're starting to find them on the East Coast. And I'm sure there's many more we have not unearthed yet. So the possibilities are endless when it comes to these megalithic sites.
Well, what is the technique used to carbon date stones? And, has these stones throughout the world, have they, at these megalithic sites, have they been carbon dated? And if so, what's the oldest that you know of?
Well, that's a good question. So a lot of people don't realize carbon-14 dating is something that is done, that can only be done with organic material. So a lot of people will say, well, we have a rock structure. Let's say we have a monolith, a single monolith, and in a cornfield, okay? It's totally random, just really weird, totally out of place. We have one monolith. And we can't really determine, well, we can look at it and think that it was probably placed there by a man, but we don't know if it was or not for sure just by looking at it. We can make a pretty good guess. But the only way we can really determine if it was moved there and when it was moved there is if we dig under that rock, under that monolith, and we look for, samples of soil that contain organic material, or we look for things, beneath the stone, on the underside of the stone, because carbon-14 dating can only be done when we actually have organic material. Organic material is the only thing that can be dated. We can't date rocks, sadly. I wish we could, but we can't. We're not at that point where we can date a rock, because rocks have existed for millions and millions of years since this earth was created. So it's really hard to say, this rock might be millions of years old, but was it placed where it is now millions of years ago? Very unlikely. So it's really difficult to be able to date a rock. So that's why we use carbon dating. We can dig beneath and try to find organic material. But the only problem with carbon dating is that we can carbon date as much as we want. We can find as many dates as we want, but there's no definitive timeline when you carbon date something. When you carbon date something, it might tell you it's, let's say, 500 years old. So if we're talking in today's world, if we find something that is carbon dated to be 500 years old, beneath, let's say, a structure of some sort, then we can assume that it was probably built by, the Spanish, or based on the geography, the location, we can say, okay, it was likely that these people built it. But the problem is that even though the structure, we dig this sample out that dates to 500 years old, if we keep digging and we keep sending things off to be carbon dated, we might end up coming up with a date that's 2000 BC. And that's the beautiful part of it, but also the part that really stinks, because we can't find, we're always actually pushing that date back. There will never be anything that pushes it forward. So the date will always be pushed back. And the most recent findings that have just blown my mind actually are from my home state, right here in Texas. And so we're looking at pools just south of, I want to say, Round Rock. And there's a very famous site there. It's an ongoing excavation, and it predates the Clovis people. And so there are points and other artifacts that have been found there, and we've been able to date them to, I think, between 15 and 16,000 years old. So this was a society, I believe, that was not a hunter-gatherer society. They were migrating constantly, and they ended up in Texas and stayed there. So that's really interesting. Why did they choose Texas to stay in and inhabit for a time? This really threw off a lot of scholars, because it was always said that about 12,000 years ago, we have the Clovis people, and they're the first major civilization in North America. So the fact that south of the Clovis people, we're referring to Clovis, New Mexico, south of the Clovis people in Texas, we have a culture that is predating the Clovis people. And that's something that is an anomaly. It's not found anywhere else so far in the United States. It's specific to Texas, predating the Clovis people, and these artifacts. So it's exciting because, like I said, we're never gonna find something that pushes the archaeological record forward. It will always be taking it back farther and farther into the depths of time. And so that's the exciting part about digging, is when you dig something up, it might be a lot older than you think, and it might be revolutionary to proving that there were people inhabiting the area, much, much farther back than we ever would imagine. That's the exciting thing. So I know that at places like America's Stonehenge, carbon dating has been done, and I believe that there are people inhabiting the area, 4,000 years back, and maybe even further back. I'm not totally up to date on all the carbon dating, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that that site was inhabited several thousand years ago. So places like Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio, there have been dates published about findings of certain things in Serpent Mound, and they have been dated to the Hopewell and Adena periods. So we're talking going back as early as probably 500 to 800 BC. I might not have the date totally correct, but it's somewhere around there. And so that's just within the Serpent Mound itself, not even going on to say that the site was inhabited. Other places of sites that have been carbon dated, because we found evidence that the site itself was inhabited for thousands of years, going back before the mound was built, thousands of years prior. So there must have been something special about the location, and there was, and that was that it was the meteor impact crater in Ohio, and I believe it's 5 miles wide, and it's significant because ancient people, they could feel these energy shifts. Today, we're so desensitized by everyday electricity and, energy current that our bodies don't pick up on these things. I mean, some of us probably do that are more sensitive to it than others. But the ancient people, they didn't have cell phones in their pockets. They didn't have computers in their backpacks. They didn't have cars they were driving and listening to the radio. They didn't have TVs that when they came home from work and flipped on their overhead light and then put on their TV while they're sitting at their desk doing work. They didn't have that kind of stuff. They just existed solely by the sunlight and the moonlight. And because of this, they were much more susceptible and connected with the natural energies of this earth. And so, of course, when they walk into a meteor impact crater site, they're going to feel that energy shift. They're going to go, whoa, hold on. This must be a sacred site. And that's why places like Serpent Mound, you go and you take a compass out and it goes haywire. You're not going to get accurate readings out there because of the electromagnetic field, because it's in a meteor impact crater. So that's one interesting aspect of sites and energies that ancient people acknowledged and were aware of.
That's interesting. Well, what's your opinion on how these ancient people, could have built these amazing structures, in America and around the world?
That's a question that archaeologists have been trying to answer for a very long time, and they are continuing to search for answers because it is difficult as a society today, as a civilization today, to try to understand how they built these things. Because I have been to sites throughout France and Ireland where you see several tons. And I mean, there is one dolmen, and a dolmen is they're called burial chambers or tombs, but they're really not, because in most cases there hasn't always been human remains found. I think that they were something different, but exactly what, I cannot say for sure. But these dolmens that were allegedly used for burials or for tombs, they were placed with two standing stones, and on top there was another standing stone. And it kind of made, if we were thinking of a really simple letter, lowercase letter N, and so it has a top across it, and then beneath it there are the two supporting stones. And those things are pretty impressive to look at because they're really random. Why would people do this? Why would they spend so much time? And I'm sure it was a major effort because these things were so heavy. At one site I went to in France, not far from the Carnac alignments and stones, there was this one dolmen, and the roof slab was like 40 tons. And it's insane because how are they doing it? They didn't have forklifts and they didn't have cranes, but cranes and forklifts, they can't move several tons. Even our technology today cannot do that. So how are these people doing it? There's one theory that perhaps they were putting dirt, lots and lots of dirt, on top of these standing stones, and that's how they were able to kind of move them into place and get them exactly where they want to be. They were basically building up the dirt and moving them that way, and then whenever they had it exactly where they wanted it to be, they would remove the dirt. So that's one idea, but still it's kind of foggy to me. I'm not totally brushed up on that, but that's one idea I heard from somebody in France. And another idea is that they somehow, of course, were able to channel energies and move it in a different way. Now, from a scientific perspective, if there's no data, I can't really believe it. There has to be evidence. But I think that if there was any evidence to support that, it would be hard to obtain just because we're not able to do that today. So in science, we have to have methodology, and in methodology, we have to have consistency. And if there's no consistency, we can't really say how they did something. So just like Egypt, when we talk about the pyramids, that's another fascinating thing. One topic that we had in one of my classes this spring was who built the pyramids. And one hypothesis was Hebrew slaves, but the archaeological record tells us this is not the case because the Egyptian culture was not a slave-owning society. And I'll tell you why. Because slave-owning societies, slaves were not literate, slaves did not consume alcohol, and slaves had a very bad diet, essentially. They were pretty much starved. And in Egypt, a lot of people were literate, and the people that were building the pyramids were probably literate, and the people that were building the pyramids also had a pretty decent diet, and they consumed alcohol. And I can tell you, the slaves consistently throughout culture and throughout the world were not consuming alcohol and having pretty extensive diets like this. So this tells us, the archaeological record tells us that based on what we know, they were not a slave-owning society. So this challenges a story in the Bible, of course. But the other hypothesis was that ancient aliens built the pyramids. And where's evidence for this? And so that was a point that was interesting because they talk about diameter of the earth having to do with the proportion, the size of the pyramid and how it's built to resemble these certain numbers and aspects of the earth. But the other hypothesis was a null hypothesis. We just simply don't know is what that means. So when I first wrote my response, I initially said, well, hypothesis number 2 doesn't sound pretty good because we don't really have any evidence that there was ancient aliens here. We haven't really dug up any alien skeletons that we know of, and so we can't really say that they were here to help us. So it would probably have to be hypothesis 1, that the Hebrew slaves did it. Even though there's no record of Hebrew slaves, we do know that there were people here building the pyramids. That was my first argument. But then my professor said, no, Hayley, the correct answer here would actually be answer number 3, a null hypothesis. And that opened my eyes because from my analytical brain, I was solely thinking that, we had to go with the most reasonable. We can reason that there were people here building these pyramids, but we can't reason that there were aliens here. But even then, I was proven wrong by my professor, and he says, no, we would say it's a null hypothesis because we don't know. And that's one aspect of archaeology that I find humbling, because when we can simply say we don't know, that really just makes us sound a lot smarter, because if we can willingly admit we don't know something, that just opens so many doors for more learning, more exploration. And that's where we're at with how these ancient sites were built, because we don't always know.
Mm-hmm. Well, does any of these megalithic stone structures show any tool marks? And if so, what type of marks, other than where they talk about bronze chisels? I'm pretty sure that a bronze chisel and bronze hammers are not going to lead to tool marks that I've seen on a lot of photos and videos, like Brian Forrester. He's done a lot of research, and I've seen a lot of photos and stuff that he's posted up that look like drill holes, like a drill bit or some kind of cutting tool.
Yes, that's a good example, because in Peru, I had the opportunity to go and visit some sites and do my own research in Peru this spring with David Childress, actually. And so he was telling me one anomaly that fascinates him are these key cuts, and they're these key-shaped cutouts. They're almost perfect. It's almost like if you had, what are they called? When you're making cookies and you have these cookie cutters. It's almost like they have a cookie cutter and they take out exactly what they want, and that's it. And it's this exact shape, and it's the same shape that's found all over Peru, all over these ancient sites there. But what's really strange is that you really can't decide how they were drilling these holes right through these rocks. And a lot of them are perfect holes. These keyhole cuts are really interesting because we don't see that. We do see it around the world, but it's a little bit more rare. And it's interesting because clearly there's some kind of technology that the ancients were tuned into that we can't totally wrap our minds around, scientifically and prove and replicate today. So that's another fascinating thing. If people are doing things that we can't do as a society in the 21st century, they might have one over us. They might be a little bit smarter. So it's important to remember that we're not the end-all be-all, and that our ancient ancestors could have been a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for. So the places in Peru, they're incredible, and especially because places like Cusco, you see these walls where these stones are so softly rounded, and they're just so perfect and precise, and they fit into place together like Legos. And that's the only way I can describe it. It's like Legos, but they, like Lego walls, they literally fit together perfectly, and they were designed that way. And it's because somehow these people were able to not carve, because these rocks in the wall were not carved. The only thing that I can reason with is that perhaps they were, at one point really hot. They were almost like liquid, and they were able to be, there was a type of perhaps a material or a substance that they used to soften these rocks and mold them into the shape that they wanted, and let them dry that way. That's the only thing that I can reasonably think of. Although we don't have any real evidence that they were doing this. We do know there are stories that were passed on from generations of indigenous Maya culture, or not Maya culture, Incan culture in Peru, and pre-Incan culture, where they talk about the way that this is done. And some of the indigenous cultures in Peru will say that their grandparents told them about this certain liquid that came from a tree or from a plant, and they would apply that to the stone, and it would cause it to melt almost into liquid. And there are stories like this, which we can't say it happened because we don't have the evidence, but we can take that into consideration and look for evidence to support those claims. And so that's where people in Peru are at, trying to find out how they got these megalithic bricks into such specific soft, rounded shapes. That's really fascinating, and that's why they're ancient mysteries, because we don't really know. But the drill bit holes, that's a whole other thing. And David Childress, who is known from Ancient Aliens, he's a well-known author, and he owns Adventures Unlimited Press. He's publishing my book. He is really fascinated by this. So if people are interested in this technology, he wrote a book called Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia, I believe. I could be totally butchering the title, but it's something like that. And it's really fascinating because it's a lot of information to absorb, and he spent so much time down there really trying to figure out these mysteries and looking at them with different people, with engineers, with local indigenous people from cultures that examine the more esoteric side of things, the more spiritual side of it. And they attribute it to a religious philosophy, to an aspect of their religion that, this creator God or spiritual figure came and taught them these ways, or came and helped them build these things, helped them harness certain powers to build these things. He comes at it from so many different ways, and that's what I like about it, because it's so interesting when you take into consideration the people themselves, not just what's there now, but the people, and you start to piece together a story for the people and what this specific site meant to them. Because when you start thinking like a human being, and what were they using it for? What would they have been doing here? Then we start to open all kinds of doors into understanding their reason for building it, their reason for wanting to build these things. And when we can understand why, we can start to maybe look at how they did it. And so it's important to remember that these were humans that built these sites, and they didn't just come up out of nowhere. So it's continued to be fascinating stuff. David likes to talk about the use of laser precision technology, which, looking at these sites, it certainly would explain some stuff, if that was the case. So that's another interesting perspective to look at too. But it did seem that the people in Peru were able to commit these massive engineering feats, and it just baffles me still, because looking at them in person, it just made me feel even more small, in this world, because we really have no idea. You look at it and you're just dumbfounded. They're just awesome, literally awesome. You look at them in awe and you just wonder how and, why did they do this? But these walls in Cusco, Peru, they are designed this way to fit together the way that they do to withstand earthquakes, because earthquakes are not, they're not uncommon in Peru. And in fact, while I was there, I was in southern Peru at the time, but in northern Peru, there was a pretty big earthquake. But thankfully, where we were, we didn't feel it or experience it in any way. But they're common down there. So these walls were engineered to withstand earthquakes. And so whenever an earthquake occurs, these pieces of brick will shake, and they might move around a little bit, but they're not going to come apart, because they're engineered and put together in such a way that they can move and they can, absorb the shock. They can withstand the impact. And so that's really, really cool, because we seem to not be able to build buildings in the same way today. Because if we could, we wouldn't have all these buildings tumbling upon earthquakes and things like that. So the people back then clearly knew how to engineer sites, buildings, structures, walls to withstand natural disasters. So I think there's stuff that we could learn from ancient people every day in terms of building and engineering aspects, but we still are baffled today. Archaeologists, geologists, engineers, they continue to be baffled, because even engineers don't understand completely how they would have done this. And when an engineer who has that kind of mind is wired to understand building techniques, when they can't figure it out, there's something else going on here that we're not totally understanding yet. So that continues to be something that will probably be the subject of investigation for many more years, and maybe many more decades, I'm sure, because we don't seem to be anywhere close to understanding the mystery of the megalithic walls of Peru or the sites there. Like Ollantaytambo I went to, and they were dragging stones, they were quarrying stones and dragging them from many miles away through a river, up a hill, to the top of this mountain, and it just doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? That's a lot of work. And there's not been any way that we can totally say for sure how they did it either, because these stones were many tons. They weren't just little blocks of brick that they were carrying across a stream. It was something they would have had to drag in some way, shape, or form, but it would have taken many people. So in Peru, there's a phenomenon called the lazy stones, and these lazy stones are massive quarried rocks, essentially, but they're much bigger than rocks. They're humongous pieces of stone that have been engineered. They've been cut to resemble, to have 90-degree angles on the corners. They've been cut to be smooth across the top. They've been cut this way, and then they were dragged, but then some of them just left the base, at the bottom of the mountain, at the bottom of the site. And that's another thing. If they cut and cored these rocks and then dragged them almost all the way there, why stop there? Why just leave them? when they brought all these other stones up to the top. So there's several things like that just don't really make any sense in Peru. And not just Peru, but that's just a worldwide thing. It just doesn't really make sense. People bring these stones so far, but they never do anything with them. And that's the case, too, at many megalithic sites. And it just continues to be something that we'll have to investigate. We'll have to study it further. And I encourage anybody that has the opportunity to see these sites to see them, because you see them in pictures, but there's nothing like standing before an incredible site like Machu Picchu, like Ollantaytambo, like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, or Chichen Itza in Mexico, or America's Stonehenge in America, or the Serpent Mound. You look at it and you wonder how, why did they do this? Or Chaco Canyon, there's so many places to visit right here in our own country that continue to be the subject of so much mystery and so much investigation, because there's just so much we don't know.
Well, what is the oldest known megalithic site known today? And
what's that? Are you there, Rodney? The oldest megalithic site that I'm aware of would be a site in, I believe, Turkey called, what's the name of it? Göbekli Tepe. And Göbekli Tepe is a site that has been dated, I want to say carbon dated, to 10,000 BC or 10,000 years old. I could be wrong. The 10,000 is a year that really sticks with me, but that's the oldest site for sure that I'm aware of, and that's a site that I would really like to visit. That is not my total area of expertise, but I've never been to that area. But I do know from reading about it that it has been the subject of much controversy in the world of academia, because these sites are built and engineered to be, aligned with certain astronomical events, but they're also built with such precision that we didn't think existed in this time. So I think that it's important to look at that and realize, hold on, maybe there's other sites that we're missing. Maybe there's other megalithic sites that are around the world that have not yet been uncovered. And Göbekli Tepe is really mysterious because it seemed to be intentionally buried. There seemed to be lots of sand that was intentionally placed on top of the site to bury it. And we wonder, who are those people that built this magnificent city and these magnificent features, and then just left them? Why were they abandoned? Why did they do that? Where did they go? Who were they? So that continues to be something also as well, not just the sites in, the Americas, but also over in the Middle East, which was allegedly the cradle of civilization, which it really wasn't. I mean, as far as cultures, it was, but there were people existing for thousands of years within prior to, the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia. So it's really interesting that's the oldest site that we have that is so impressive that we have found today. But there could very well be other sites that are just as ancient, waiting to be unearthed, that have been intentionally buried, like Göbekli Tepe.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I just want to make sure. I got cut off from online, so I had to actually phone into my own show. I've had to do this a few times this year. I don't know what is up with Blog Talk, but at least you can hear me. That's the good thing. The next thing I was wanting to ask you, I know you may know of Heather Arnold, and where she does a lot of research on giants. What is your thoughts about giants, and do you think they correlate with any megalithic sites?
Well, of course, at Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio, there was a skeleton unearthed there that was allegedly 10 feet, I think 10 feet tall. But the difficult thing is, when we have skeletons, it's all about how you lay it out. We don't know exactly with flesh, organs, and everything else where it sat, how it was, how the body actually was when it was living. So we really can't say for sure how tall somebody was. We can do our best and measure their skeleton, but that's not going to account for flesh. It's not going to account for the way that, the natural biology causes us to be. For example, if I were just going to be measured as a skeleton, how far are you going to lay out my ribs apart from each other? How far are you going to lay out, certain bones? And that's another part of trying to decide the height of a skeleton that makes it complicated. And, we can move and space things in a way that causes these skeletons to appear larger than they might have been, or we might not be giving them enough space. We might be making them look smaller than they were. So that's an interesting point to look at, that we might not know how big these people were back, thousands or hundreds of years ago, whenever it might have been. But at megalithic sites, it does seem to be consistent that there are these abnormally large skeletons found, and very well over 6 feet. And so there was a people that inhabited the south coast of Texas, and they were called the Karankawa. And the Karankawa people existed there for going back thousands of years to even 10,000 years old. It's some of the carbon dating of that culture that has been found, but in some of the bones of these people. And the reason we can associate them is because of the DNA testing that can be done. And the Karankawa people were known for being, the men were known to be over 6 feet tall. So there's very much documentation of giant people existing. And so the Karankawas were a very large group of indigenous people. If we go down south into Mexico, beyond South Texas, right down the coast, we have, at a time that coexisted with the Karankawa, the Maya people. And, I'm 5'2" today. And so when I stayed in the Maya village and I interacted with these Mayan people, today they're still super short. I felt like a giant, because these Maya people, the men are like 4'10" to 5 foot. So how could these people, these Karankawa Indians living on the south coast going back to 10,000 years, be so tall, and then right down the coast, these other people being so short? So that tells us they weren't related. There was some genetic difference that they had, and that kind of points us in the direction of the Karankawa migrated to this location from a different place than the Mayan people did. And so the migration courses of these people is a very complicated thing, and it's something that we're still trying to understand. So it continue, that also is something that we can't totally figure out based on the archaeological record. There's no real pattern of these giant skeletons aside from them being found at megalithic sites and burial mounds around the country. So the burial mounds can be significant in their own way too. They can be aligning with certain events, like we talked about before. And so maybe that could help clue into why certain people were placed where they were in these mounds. But also we know that there have been cultures burying their dead for thousands and thousands of years. And in fact, there's no limit to how many years people have been, burying their dead, because, there's only so much you can do with a corpse. You can leave it and let it decay naturally, or there were such things known as water burials, where they're, like the Vikings, for example, they would push out the bodies on a raft and light it on fire. And so we don't really know for sure where everybody was buried, where everybody is that existed here on Earth at one time. So we could be missing a vast number of people. Let's say that there was many other native cultures that were large in stature. Well, if they had ideas like burning the corpses or pushing them out to sea, unless we're going to go look through the entire ocean, which even then it's difficult because of the natural decaying process of DNA and, of bones. So it's hard to determine, but there's so much out there that we just don't understand about the past. And science excavations have told us today that they did exist. The people that were of abnormally large stature did exist, and they were found mostly around these, within these burial mounds and around these megalithic sites.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's your opinion about the Great Cataclysm? That happened about 14,000 years ago. Could humans have lost knowledge to build these great structures due to whatever happened at that point in time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that there has been information and knowledge that's been lost. because there's so many things that can occur that can cause a civilization to collapse so quickly. People like to say, for an example, the people, some academics, not so much, but some academics like to say that Mayans just disappeared. They just vanished. They were just gone one day. That's up and left, and they're gone, disappeared into nowhere. No, not really. That's not really how it happened. What really happened with the fall of the Mayan civilization is that there was, two factors really here, and that was, there was a trade route. There was a trade network. But there comes a time when there are other tribes coming in here from other areas, and they start, stealing from these lone traders that would travel, village women or village men, that would travel many miles to go to a certain location. It was like a market, and they would be attacked, killed, stolen from, and this happened so much that the Maya people stopped wanting to go to these trade markets and sell their things. And when I say sell, they used beans, I believe, and they used things of that nature to sell. There was no form of money, but rather their own take on it. So they obviously didn't have coins they were minting or pressing, but they had their own form of trade system. And when that became an issue of getting somewhere safely, people start moving in closer together, because especially in the Maya territory towards the coast, people lived generally within the same area, but they weren't next door neighbors. They weren't living right next to somebody else. And so they had their own space, they had their own areas to grow crops, and they could do so and be growing lots of crops. But at this time, when people start becoming scared, they start moving closer together. So now when you're moving closer together, you have a limited area outside of your circle where you're going to want to plant crops and harvest these crops. And then ultimately, you're going to use up soil. You're going to use up the natural resources around you, and you're going to have to move. And at some point, you're going to use up all the sources in the area, and you're going to have to leave and go somewhere else. And so when this started happening, people start moving closer together, but this causes not only an economical collapse, but also an environmental collapse. And it was the Mayan impact on the environment and the environment's impact on the Mayans that really brought the collapse of the Mayan people. And so I think that these collapses of civilization, of course, were happening throughout history. But 12,000 years ago, this is during the last ice age and towards the ending of it. And so the last ice age, of course, was very harsh on the environment. And with the end of the ice age, we see a lot of animals go extinct. And so when these animals are going extinct, some of these people are losing their way of life. If they were hunting the mammoth and the mammoth was extinct, and that was what they depended on, these people are going to have to find some other way to live, or they're not going to make it. And so there are probably several tribes and several, different cultures that were lost during the end of this last ice age. And there are many people that we don't know about today. And it's just like in today's world, we don't know about a lot of the American Indians and their tribes that existed here before Europeans came over. The reason being, a lot of them were killed off in the early years of European colonization. And so these civilizations, what did they know? What stories were passed on from their grandparents and their grandparents, and going back even farther? We don't know what technology and what information they might have had that we have lost today because Europeans killed off by disease, by massacre. We don't know what was lost. And so I have no doubt in my mind that there was many occurrences throughout history where information, knowledge, and sacred wisdom has been lost to these things. And just like weather, of course, can be a major factor here. So it's just like the story in Pompeii, where the volcano erupts, and all these people were just suddenly within a day dead, and it caused not just the local area harm, but the surrounding areas, because Mother Nature has a mind of her own, and that's something we cannot control. And so it comes to a point where you have weather playing a major part in the role of people and how they can use and withstand the environmental changes that are occurring. So when something like this happens, if people are living in a time in an area where there's a drought and they can't grow crops and they don't have enough drinking water and they don't have enough food, eventually they're going to start to die off. They're going to starve. They're going to start to die. So then we have places like there's a site that is currently being excavated that's underwater off the coast of Bulgaria. This is a Bronze Age settlement off the coast of Bulgaria. And nobody knew it existed until it has been located, and now underwater archaeologists are excavating the site and starting to see that this happened. This whole city went underwater within a day. And this is not uncommon. This kind of thing happens all the time, and it happened all the time throughout history. Within a day, there can be environmental changes. A city can become, a sunken city. There's nothing to say that this cannot happen because it has. So why couldn't it happen again? For all we know, these stories about lost continents like Atlantis and Lemuria and others, they could very well be out there, and we just might not have found them yet. Because the oceans, are the most unexplored part of this earth. There's so much beneath the ocean that we have not found. And so based on what we've seen in the archaeological record on civilizations that are emerging now that are underwater or that have been buried, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, there's no set limit to how many civilizations we might have lost, and with that, their knowledge. So we continue to look for these things today, to look for secrets of past civilizations that lie buried. And that's what the world of archaeology and anthropology really does, because we're still learning about a past that has for so long been buried under water or buried under dirt.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's your opinion about how the Bible and religion describes ancient sites, compared with the evidence that you have found? Is there any contradictions? Oh,
many contradictions, but also there are affirmations too, because like I mentioned earlier, the pyramids were said to have been built by Hebrew slaves. And there's the famous Bible scene of Moses leading the people out of Egypt, freeing the slaves. But the archaeological record tells us that didn't really happen that way. I mean, it's possible that they might have been working there. That's what the archaeological record says, that there are people that were well fed, consuming alcohol, that were literate, and they were working in Egypt, probably building the pyramids. But what the archaeological record tells us, in contradiction to the Bible, is that they were not slaves. The Bible says they're slaves, and that means they're working for nothing. They're just forced into forced labor. But that's not the case, and from what we found. Now, maybe one day there will be some other evidence that will tell us otherwise, but the majority of the archaeological excavations that have been done and the analyses of the remains have told us that these people were well-fed, literate, and consuming alcohol. And slaves, they weren't allowed to have a good time, You're slaves. So as far as we know, but that's one thing that contradicts the Bible. There are several other aspects too. If we're talking about, like, let's say, even if this might piss some people off, but the idea of the resurrection of Christ and his, ascending physically to heaven from his tomb. There's a place called the Talpiot Tomb, and this is allegedly the location of the remains of Jesus Christ and his children, one being named Judah, a wife named Mary. And I don't know if this is sounding familiar to anybody, but the Talpiot Tomb, if you haven't heard of it, look it up. And that is allegedly the resting place of Jesus, his wife, and his children, and perhaps other family members. So in the Bible, it tells us that Jesus physically rises from the dead and that he ascends to the heavens in a physical manner. But what we can't find realistically in the archaeological record, we can't find any evidence that somebody rose physically to the heavens. Now, it could have happened, but there's no evidence to support that. And so using the methodology that we do, we cannot say it happened. We can say we don't have any evidence to support that. So as far as we're concerned, the data tells us that it didn't happen or that we don't know. And that's what we can observe from that sense. But if we were able to, let's say there's somebody that we can totally identify as a descendant of Jesus Christ, which at this point, as far as I'm aware, there is no one that we can definitively say is a descendant of Jesus Christ, a direct descendant anyway. So it's really hard to determine who this was. Now, the bodies that were in the tomb, known as the Talpiot tomb, there are inscriptions there that say, a man named Jesus, Mary, Judah. I think there's somebody else named Joseph there. I could be getting that wrong, but this Talpiot tomb could very well be the resting place of Jesus Christ, but we would have to be able to prove it. And even though the remains are there, how are we going to prove that it's actually Jesus as opposed to any other Middle Eastern man named Jesus? So the archaeological record hasn't supported that any human being or any creature really has been able to physically rise from his grave and physically rise up to the heavens. So that's another part of the Bible that is not really supported by the archaeological record at this time.
What other parts of the Bible that the archaeological record doesn't really show that they preach about or will move heaven and hell to prove you wrong?
Well, that's a good question, and some of this I could tie into the book that I'm writing about the sacred feminine, because this is a very controversial topic, is the idea that Jesus had a wife named Mary Magdalene. And it's a very romantic idea, and I will admit that I've been swept away by this idea and this notion, and that there is a sacred bloodline that we call the Holy Grail. It's a really exciting, romantic idea, and I catch myself every day being totally just swept away by it, because it totally would change everything. And really and truly, there's a lot of evidence to support that Jesus was a man. The deification of Christ did not come until the Council of Nicaea, and that was overseen by Constantine, and there are many other bishops there. This was in Rome, and this didn't happen until after the death of Christ, a long time later after the death of Christ. And it wasn't until then that they decide at this point that Jesus is now the Son of God. And this can be tied back to ancient religious practices of there being a sun god or a god that dies and is reborn. And so for 3 days, the idea of Jesus dying and, being dead for 3 days and then rising from his grave, 3 days can almost be put identically into terms with the winter solstice. For 3 days during the winter solstice, the sun stands almost still. And so at this point, there's 3 days that the Son of God is allegedly, spends dead or with his Father, and then all of a sudden he rises from the grave. But there's no evidence to support that. And so in the Bible, it talks about him being married. Well, no, I take that back. And in the Lost Gospel of Mary Magdalene, it refers to Mary Magdalene as being his companion, which literally meant spouse. And that was taken out of the Bible. That's not in the Bible. That was thrown out at the Council of Nicaea. So people were picking and choosing what books went in the Bible to support their theories. And this is almost identical to things that we see happening in the archaeological world today. There are people all over this world, all over this continent, North America, that are not liking the dates that they get, these carbon dating techniques, bring them these dates that don't totally fit their theory. So what do they do with this information? Nothing. They don't publish it. They only publish what goes hand in hand with what they're taught, what they want to believe with their agenda. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm, some kind of conspiracy theorist, but this is just fact. And this has happened on several occasions. And I can honestly say this has happened at the Serpent Mound. And with, the archaeologist that is the state archaeologist of Ohio, he has not published every single date. He's only published certain dates that fit his take on Serpent Mound. So this is not something that is crazy to think about, because it happens all the time, not just in archaeology, but in every field, the medical field especially too. That's very, very common actually, sadly. But going back to the parts of the Bible that are not proven by the archaeological record, the idea of Christ being a spiritual being or the Son of God, his deification, the idea that he is somehow part God, this is not supported, because we cannot find any DNA evidence to support that there has been a man that somehow was God. Because even then, how could we prove that God is God? How would we know what a God on earth is? Essentially, we would have to be able to say, he's different somehow biologically from another human being, and we can't do that because we don't have a comparison. So I guess on the contrary, we really can't say that Jesus wasn't God. But what the archaeological record has shown us is that there has been people existing on Earth for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and we have not yet to see anything that might allude to a human being of godly descendants or biological nature. So that's another interesting part of it. But also that, during his lifetime, nobody really attributed to him to being this totally divine child of God, because he refers to himself in the Bible as being the Son of Man. He's very humble. And in the book, The Lost Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she talks about, it talks about them being intimate in the sense that Jesus kisses her on the lips, and the disciples are jealous. They say, "Why do you love her more than us?" And so Jesus tries to explain to his disciples at that time that he cannot love his disciples in the same way he loves his wife. That's not how it works. So that's another interesting part of it, and people don't want to look at that because it totally throws off the ideals of the Roman Catholic Church. It totally changes everything. And if there's evidence, which I think there will be evidence that surfaces to prove otherwise, that Jesus was in fact married to a woman, the idea that he had children is not so far-fetched if he was married, and especially considering, as far as we know, he was a man that probably did everything that a normal human does. He probably ate, probably drank water, he probably, spent many years aging just like a normal person. He probably fell in love with a woman, got married, had children, because that's what humans do, and that's what the archaeological record tells us that humans do. And if he did take a wife, which I'm sure he did if he was a normal human being, just like the rest of us, he had children, and these children would be children. They would be normal human beings, unless for some reason we can decide that Jesus is in fact some kind of special deity or some kind of superhuman, which we don't know for sure. I know he's a superhero to a lot of people, and I think that I have a lot of superheroes too that are people that were humans, and they did amazing, incredible things, and they taught some amazing lessons, but they were humans. And those are our idols. Those are the people we look up to. And Jesus probably took a wife and probably had children. And Mary Magdalene was totally misconstrued by the Roman Catholic Church. And this is another thing. The archaeological record doesn't tell us anything really about Mary of Magdala. But what we do know is that there are many Marys in the Bible. And we do know that she actually is noted, of course, for washing Jesus' feet, anointing his feet, kissing his feet, doing these things. Now, this was a practice done by high priestesses of Egypt. And in those times, priestesses would take on the role of the goddess of her temple. If she was a priestess of Temple of Isis, she would take on the role of Isis when the king came and decided to take on the role of Osiris, for example. So there were sacred rituals done that might be consummation of a union between a god and a goddess, for example. And so this idea of washing somebody's feet and kissing their feet, anointing their feet, this was something done in an Egyptian temple by a high priestess. So we can assume that perhaps this Mary that we're talking about was actually from Egypt. And there was obviously some kind of connection or consort nature between Jesus and this woman. And it wasn't something that was just done that everybody did. It was a very intimate thing to be washing and kissing somebody's feet. Even in the Bible, that was kind of scandalous for that time period. So the fact that it alludes that perhaps she was actually from Egypt. And so the Mary in the Bible, Mary of Magdala, is misconstrued by the church. In the Bible, it says that Christ exorcises 7 demons out of her, or 7 devils out of her. And we don't know exactly what this means, but there are many Marys, so it's kind of hard to keep them all straight, especially when some parts of words and names have been lost to translation. It's kind of hard to separate who's who, what Mary is what Mary. But Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene that we know now, we don't have any evidence to say that she was a prostitute the way that the church has made her out to be. What we do know is that the church at one point in time did not have Bibles out during the time of church, and they would read strictly, the bishops, the people that were teaching in the church would read from the Bible and only teach what they wanted to teach, what they saw fit to teach. and in their own way. And it was at this time that people start saying Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. And it's because they're trying to take away from the idea that she could have been married to Jesus. And even if she was a prostitute, she decides that she's going to take this life that she has and totally turn it around. So who's to say that Jesus didn't marry a former prostitute? We all sin in our own way. So who's to say that Jesus didn't love her, for who she was and for who she turned into? So there's a lot of things in the Bible that are very controversial, like the idea of Christ having a holy bloodline and that being known as the Holy Grail today.
Well, I got a question also about the names of people in the Bible, like common names like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Mary. Aren't these English names?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really hadn't thought about it like that, but that's very true. They are English names today, but originally, like Thomas, for example, is a Hebrew name. And they of course originally had different pronunciations, but essentially they were still the names that they were, just in a more Hebrew form. It's just like how we have in Spanish the name John is Juan, and vice versa. So we take these original names and we modify them to fit our language. And so that's probably what happened in the Bible. In biblical times, there were these names, and Thomas might have been pronounced a completely different way, but when spoken in English enough times, it turns into Thomas. So same thing with Juan and John and several other names that are this way, just like James in the English language is James, and then in Spanish it's Jaime. There's many different interpretations of evolution of names and words in different languages. So that's another interesting aspect of it. I haven't had anybody really ask me that, so nice question. I'm glad you asked that. It's interesting to see how names change over the years and from different people to different people on a worldwide scale.
Well, the reason why I asked is just thinking about the climate of America right now, not really liking people with brown skin, no matter where you're from. Just wondering how they would feel about their Bible if it was Allah or Hussein or someone like that with a original name for that area.
Well, Jesus isn't really English. Jesus himself has been portrayed to be a white man, but that's not what he was. He was Middle Eastern, unless they're based on the archaeological record. The people that he associated with and his location, his upbringing, he was Middle Eastern, and he had darker skin, darker hair. But we can't say that he wasn't white. That he wasn't white, because we have no DNA evidence to prove otherwise. Until we get our hands on the DNA of Christ, we can't for sure say, but we can assume based on the evidence that he was probably Middle Eastern, had a darker skin tone and darker hair, and he himself is Middle Eastern. So this idea of white supremacy that exists within the United States and even other organizations around the world, the idea of racial supremacy is not new. It has been an idea since the dawn of time, since people were created and there were different skin colors and different cultures. There has been a battle between races. That's not going to end anytime soon, because that's a timeless issue. And I hate to say that, but that's the case. Until, we all start to look at each other and see each other for the skeletons that are beneath our skin, we're not ever going to acknowledge the fact that we're no better than another person. But yeah, that's been a big thing since the dawn of time. Just like the Hebrew people, they have been the subject of so many horrible, traumatic things throughout history. And you know what? It seems to happen time and time again. And there's still attacks that occur against Judaism and people that we call Jews. That's not something that's going to change, because as long as there's different religions, as long as there are different cultures and different belief systems, as long as there is a God, and as long as there has been a God, there has been bloodshed in his name, and there will continue to be. And that's just the sad truth of it, because people can't respect one another's beliefs. That's going to continue to happen, and people will be killed. And it's just like we're talking about brown-skinned people. Yeah, the people in Mexico really, south of the American border, and not just Mexico, but it goes on down to South America too. These people, we really shouldn't be calling them brown skin. If we're going to call them anything, we should call them red skin, because the Native Americans here, they're related to people that are just south of the border. And for centuries, the U.S. government has treated the red-skinned people of North America horribly. And I say this after having experienced time, being the subject of so many awful things. Like we talk about the Trail of Tears that happened. Thousands of Indians were massacred. They were killed, and they were led off their homelands, and they continue to be displaced. And so the people in North America are no different than the people in Mexico right now. The only difference is that there is a border that is not totally physical, although it's trying to be physical now, but there's a border here that separates two lands that were at one time the same land. And at one time, there was a vast trade network that went on from North America to Central America to South America and probably across the oceans. And so this happening of putting a border up and trying to say, you're not worthy, or you don't belong here, that's been something that's been happening forever. Just like the Jews have been kicked out of almost every place that they've settled. The Babylonians kicked them out of their holy land. They were kicked out they've just been all over the place, and they never got a break. They still haven't. And the poor Native people here, the Native Americans, are no different from the Native Americans that are in Central America and the Native Americans that are in South America. They're all the same. And I actually just got back from a reservation in South Dakota called Pine Ridge, which is a very significant place as far as American history. But I went to a Sundance ceremony there. And so I spent a week living with the people there, camping outside, staying on their homeland, their ancestral homeland, and being part of their ceremony and helping them and learning from them. And the Native Americans, they have never, in fact, they believe that all four colors are sacred, and a woman named White Buffalo Castleman came and brought them 7 sacred rites, 7 teachings, and she told them before she left, she rolled into a buffalo calf, which is a white buffalo calf, last. But firstly, she's, red, yellow, and black, and then she's white. And she does this as a symbol to remind the Native people that they are no better than their brothers and sisters that are of the rainbow, that are different colors. And this is important to remember because these are the people that lived here before Europeans came overseas and decided, this land looks nice, we're going to claim it as our own and kill everybody on it. But sadly, that's been something that's been happening since there's been people living on land. They're going to get pushed out, and they're going to be the subject of mass destruction, just like the Indians were to the Europeans. And the people in Mexico are facing the same thing right now. We are forcing them to not come into a land that was at one time their ancestors' land. And there were no borders to their ancestors. And the Native Americans, if you talk to them today, when we were on the reservation, I asked, okay, there's the Lakota people, but then there's there's many different parts of the Sioux Nation. And I asked, well, what about the Nakota people? What about the Dakota people? What state were they? What state were they inhabiting? And I kept having to be reminded that at the time that they were, freely living here, there was no state, there was no border. It was just their territory. And so that reminds us that at one point in time, the United States was not defined by the borders that we have declared today, that it was defined by the people that inhabited the areas. And there were trade networks all over the country and connecting down to Mexico. So the people in Mexico were trading and probably intermarrying with the people of North America. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Well, does the church have any archaeologists, and do they, if they do they try to fit the narrative to, especially with the story of Jesus, to fit their narrative?
Well, you don't need archaeologists to come up with an agenda. Anybody can do that. But yeah, there's people that work for the Vatican that probably have a sole job of working through an archaeological methodology and retrieving artifacts, examining artifacts, deciding if they're artifacts that the public should know about or if they shouldn't know about them. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that they have people that do these things because when you have an organization, you have a hierarchy, like in the church you have, and they decide what's acceptable to be published and what's not acceptable to be published, and the stuff they don't want to publish, just like in the world of archaeology that I'm talking about. dates not being published. Same thing as the Vatican. If they decide that they don't want somebody to know about a certain artifact that's been found, perhaps like the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or anything else, or maybe, documents, or maybe certain things that would signify not everything is as the church wants us to believe. If there was proof of, Jesus rising from the grave, wouldn't they share that with us? So I think that if it was something in their favor, yeah, just like the Shroud of Turin. I think that if there is something that they found in their favor of what they teach, they're going to share it. But on the opposite side, if they find something that's going to not support their claim, they're going to do everything they can for that information to not be released to the public. And like I said, it happens, in archaeology, it happens in the medical world, it happens in the geological world, it happens everywhere. So why would it not happen in the Vatican?
No, that's true. Well, why is gold so important to the ancient people? What made them decide that gold was so precious?
Well, and this question really ties back into a spiritual side of things too, because ancient people, they really kind of survived off of the land, and so when they found precious things within the land, this was very significant. And so, if you'll notice, like there's the Great Lakes in North America, the Great Lakes in Michigan, that are known for missing copper. And this copper, where did it go? And scientists, people come out here and they say, academics have published information talking about this mystery of the Great Lakes. These people, some time ago, before we had, Native Americans say that they don't know anything about the mining. They had nothing to do with it. So it was clearly other cultures coming to North America utilizing these sources. And so if people were coming here in, let's say, 1000 BC to mine this copper, then why wouldn't they have gone other places to mine, precious metals or precious elements that they find? And so there could have been a huge network of people coming over with the whole system planned out already to mine gold in Central and South America. There could have been people coming here to mine copper, mine iron. I mean, what fueled the Bronze Age in Europe? A lot of people speculate that it could have been the removal of the copper from the Great Lakes region, and it could have been taken back to Europe, Middle East, the Mediterranean, this entire area. It could have been used. There's so much missing that it's really difficult to account for, and it still is another huge mystery in North America. But gold was precious to the ancient people on several accounts, but they knew the special elemental properties that it had. And so this is why they made so many of their artifacts out of gold. The sad thing is we don't see a lot of them around today because so many of them were taken away and stolen by looters and then by conquistadors, by early settlers, people that came in and killed the people and stole all their riches, all their gold. And in a lot of cases, like for example at Chichen Itza, there is a cenote, which is like an underground water system with rivers connecting to other cenotes, other underground water holes, and they would throw their gold into these cenotes. They would throw their gold in as a sacrifice, and they would sacrifice people too, but they would adorn the underworld with all these riches, and they would throw these things in here to give to their beloved in the underworld, to the gods of the underworld. So gold has always been precious to them, and I think that they, like I said before, they were sensitive to energies. When you're desensitized to these things, like we are today, we don't notice as much. You might pick up a piece of gold and think it's pretty, but are you going to feel a real energetical shift when you pick it up? Probably not. But the ancient people might have. If they didn't have everything that we have today, they might have been able to feel some type of energy coming from this. And a lot of rocks, just like people use crystals today for healing, they did the same thing back then. So gold was obviously something that was very special and precious to them, and as was copper and iron and other silver. So they were using these things for thousands of years and saw the sacredness of these objects and of these stones and minerals that were being mined for such a long time.
Okay. Well, what about the Nazca lines? What are their purpose? And seeing that you can only see them from the sky, how were they able to create them?
I wish I knew. I don't really have, nobody really has an answer as to how they were created, just because they're such an anomaly. But what we do have is the Nazca lines, like you mentioned, they can only be really viewed from the sky. But then we have a place like Serpent Mound in Ohio that you really can't get a great look at unless you're above it as well. And then we have lines in, I want to say, California that are called, these people are referred to as the Aztecs, and they could be very well into Nevada too, in that area. But there are lines there that are, not identical, but very similar to the ones in Peru. And who knows? Perhaps they thought the Christian idea of God is that God, reigns from the heavens, from above us. You look up to the heavens and you think there's God. So originally, before Christianity, which arose in the 1st century AD, we have ancient spiritualities and religions talking about the Father in the heavens, which would be the Son, Father Sky, Father Sun, Grandfather Sun, Grandfather Sky, many different names. The ancient Canaanites called him Baal. The Celtic people called him Bel. The people in Egypt had many names for him, one being Ra. There's so many different names. In the Christian world, we call him God, in Hebrew, Yahweh. There's just so many different names that we have for the Father in the heavens. So the people, when they look up to the sky, they think if they're building these things, that their gods are going to be looking down upon them, and they're going to be happy when they see these things. And perhaps they were trying to channel their God, or trying to lure him down to come and visit them. So the lines in Nazca, they're very mysterious, and the ones in California are mysterious as well. But like Serpent Mound is built above ground, and there are some effigies that are built into the ground, like we carve out the earth in order to make these effigies. So the people that built Nazca kind of pursued this way of doing it, of building their effigies. But they're certainly peculiar. They're massive. They're humongous. So it definitely is a puzzling question. Who are they trying to get to see them? But my answer would immediately be the gods, and take that any way that you want to, because it could be the Father in the heavens. It could be any one of their gods, and perhaps they thought that maybe there would be somebody above that would see them and be pleased and bring them rain, or bring them a fruitful harvest. Like you never know. And so that's one way of looking at it. But maybe they were trying to flag somebody down. That's essentially what they were doing by trying to appease the gods.
Okay. Well, who were the Anunnaki, and what role did they play in human civilization?
The Anunnaki were gods of the ancient Middle East, and the Anunnaki were bringers of wisdom and knowledge. And they talk about, one of the first names that's referenced is Adam, actually, which is interesting because that gives us a basis of the Adam that's portrayed in the book of Genesis. But Anunnaki were these people that in some cases are said to have been gods that came here from a planet called Nibiru and wanted to have a slave race to mine the gold here, because we're talking about the significance of gold. Well, these gods allegedly were the Anunnaki that wanted the gold, and they created mankind to be a slave race. But the fact of the matter is, we've had people that had power over others going back centuries, thousands of years. It's just like there's a cute movie on Disney Channel that they made a long time ago, and it used to be one of my favorite movies, called El Dorado, the City of Gold. And these two guys from Spain stow away on a conquistador ship. They end up in the New World, and they end up wandering into a Maya village. Well, the Maya people, they think these tall, white, glowing humans are gods, and that's misconstrued. And I'm sure it happened. I'm sure, I have no doubt in my mind, that there were times when there were people of a different skin color that appeared to be beautiful and magnificent, and the people that were not as intelligent or as advanced believed them to be gods. And, we see the same thing with what we call cargo cults. And this was a big thing with the Pacific Islanders. The Pacific Islanders, for a long time, during, I believe, World War II, were constantly, worshiping idols of these planes that were flying overhead, these cargo planes. And so we call it the cargo cult. because the cargo cults are people that are worshiping this flying vehicle, and perhaps, we don't know how long before we've got no evidence of any flying machines existing in a physical manner. We don't have that evidence to tell us they were flying machines at the time, but there's stories like Thunderbird the Native Americans have. And so Thunderbird, if we're talking about a large craft that makes a lot of noise, a Thunderbird might be a good word to use for that, and it might look like a bird or, from the ground, but there's no evidence to say that there was flying machines. We don't have one to look at in our hands, but what we do have are ancient legends that talk about them. So we just have to look for the validity in these ancient legends to see if they're true or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've read that, researchers have been studying fossilized footprints that's located in Utah that date back 500 million years, and in New Mexico, a footprint that dates back 250 million years. Is it possible that man or some other humanoids was around that long ago? And if so, is there any evidence to back it other than what they've found so far?
Well, I mean, we have ancestors of humans that we like to say are the ancestors of primates, of apes, and that goes back several million years, over 6 million years, because I remember studying actually this theory of it talks about the out of Africa theory, and it goes more in depth to talking about the people that were inhabiting Africa for millions of years, or the apes, the ancestors, the primordial ancestors that were inhabiting this area. I'm trying to think, what's the name of this theory? It talks about these people, these primordial ancestors being in the deserts in Africa, but first they were in the rainforest. The environment changed, and so as it became more of a savanna and then it became more of a desert, they're being pushed back further and further and further towards the coast. And when they're pushed back towards the coast, they have to adapt to fish and to swim and hunt for their food within the water. And so the name, it's driving me crazy. I can't think of the name of it. It's the something water hate. It has to do with the idea that they went into the water to hunt, and this is why we don't have as much hair these days. There's a specific group of these ancestors, and this was 6 million years ago, and 6 million years ago, that's when they were pushed to the coast, and they had to adapt over generations for hunting within the waters. And so this is why they're become less hairy. And also, this is a turning point, too, because we start to see the noses, the shape of the noses for this certain strand of genetic ancestors. They go from being flat to being pointed out, pointed down, so that when they dive into the water, they don't have water and bubbles going right to their brain. So this is an adaptation that occurs. They don't have as much body hair so that they can be more aerodynamic. And it's fascinating because this is something that could really help us track our ancestors and this turning point. When they became beings that hunted in the water, and that accounts for the shape of our noses today, and then also accounts for the idea that, this is not an idea, that babies in the womb have gills. This is a fact. Fetuses have gills. And so this would make sense. If this was the case, if our ancient ancestors that we're all descended from, had to adapt to diving into the water, aquatic ape theory, that's the theory, aquatic ape theory. If they had to adapt to hunting within the water, over time, many generations, physically, they would adapt to this. Just like if they were, if they had to go from being water creatures, because there's not enough, fish in the sea anymore, if there's not enough food in the sea, they would have to adapt and come on land, which is also another angle that biologists and historians say happened, that they actually came out of the ocean and came onto land. And that's another interesting side of it, too, because I'm sure that was happening in some places around the world, too. There's so many different environmental systems and scenarios where species have to adapt and evolve. So to me, it's not even a question that this happened, but, where exactly did it happen and, why exactly did it happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, ley lines. I know I've heard and read a lot about ley lines and the significance of how a lot of ancient sites are built on top of these ley lines. In your opinion, what are and also in your research, what is the significance of these sites being built on ley lines?
Ley lines are lines that we attribute to being points of significant energetical sources around planet Earth. There's a great book on these ley lines by a friend of mine named Hugh Newman, and this book is called The Earth Grid, I believe, or The Earth Grid. And it is, Earth Grid. And it's really fascinating because it talks about all the stuff. And, of course, places like the pyramids and the places like Stonehenge and other major megalithic sites can be found upon these ley lines. So I got to see a lot of places in Europe that are on certain ley lines. And, of course, they have names today. But there's theories that propose that they were done. These sites were built on top of points on these ley lines purposely to track this energy and to keep it moving and flowing, to harness that power and that energy of the earth on these sites. And from a physical standpoint, from looking at it in a way of math and physics, everything that is a phenomena can be attributed to science in some way, shape, or form. We just might not have the science to explain it. So these ley lines could be very well harnessing energy that is coming out of the earth. It's just like we have volcanoes. You know, we have energy coming out of the earth when we have volcanoes erupting. That's energy. And just like, you know, we have water coming out of the earth, these springs with water flowing upwards. That's energy. So why can't we say that there is energy we cannot see coming up out of the earth? Things that we cannot explain. We don't know everything. Science is expanding every day, and these energies that the ancient people might have been able to harness that we can't explain might not have been so mysterious to our ancestors. It very well could have been something that they harnessed and were very well aware of, and perhaps that helped them somehow construct these really impressive ancient sites. Until someone can tell me that there's evidence to say they didn't use that, I will continue to say that it's a possibility, because anything is a possibility until it is proved wrong by science.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a question I like to ask about all my guests. Have you had any experiences with anything in your life, paranormal, crypto, or any UFO encounters?
Oh, of course, and I think that we all have, but I think that some of us don't always recall them, and I think that some of us suppress these traumatic memories. So if they are traumatic experiences, then why would you want to recall them? That's a thing that happens with many different cases around the world, whether it's child abuse cases, whether it's, you know, situations where children experience, they see things that are very traumatic at a young age, and we suppress them. And so that's why we have hypnotherapists that can go in and perform regression hypnosis to get these things out. So I know that a lot of abductees and people that have experienced traumatic, supernatural, or paranormal experiences have undergone regression hypnosis to try to recall them. Now, of course, I've had my fair share of spiritual experiences, just like everybody else has. But I think that question is, just to me, everybody has had an experience. So whether they choose to talk about them or to admit to them or acknowledge them, that's the really big thing there. But yeah, of course, when I was a kid, I felt very, very close to my family, and there was a great-grandfather I had as a child. And when I was a baby, and I could barely, I was probably 2 or 3 years old, my parents used to tell me that I would sit in the corner, and talk to my great-great-grandfather that died when I was 6 months old. But I don't remember it. I was a baby. I can't recall that, but I'm sure that there's been other things like that happened to me when I was young. If I was talking to my great-great-grandfather, I can't recall that. I don't remember seeing him, but I definitely think that supernatural occurrences are happening around us all the time to many people. And I think it's sad, too, that a lot of people that have had these experiences and may even have proof to document it are being dismissed as being, sick or being crazy, because that's not the case. There are many people that experience unexplained phenomena on a daily basis.
Well, I agree. Well, seeing how we're running out of time, I won't trouble you much longer. What are your plans for 2000 for rest of 2019? Do you have any projects that you're working on or anything that you can discuss?
Yeah. Of course, the book I'm writing right now, which is about the sacred feminine, and it has a flavor for everybody. If you want to look at the science of the sacred feminine, of God, goddess, the feminine aspect of God, it has a little bit of that for you, for those people. And then for those that are interested in the more esoteric side of things, I do get into the Knights Templar and the idea of dualism, talking about the Cathars and how they inspired the Templars, and the Cathars inspired the Cistercian, monks. The idea of pre-Columbian contact, they were coming here. Then it also goes into talk about, Freemasonry, secret societies. We talked a little bit about those things, and also Native Americans and how the goddess played a role in their religions. But also, it's really a worldwide scale because I talk about the goddess in so many different ancient societies and ancient religious beliefs. So that's one thing I'm really working on, is that book, and it'll be published in springtime of 2020. And actually, I think in about 3.5 weeks, I will embark on a journey to Scotland and France, and I'll be doing some research there and looking at different aspects of these ideas, promoting a bloodline existing, a holy bloodline existing, and see if there's anything worth, talking about in my book there. But the Merovingians were rumored to be the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So there's a few burial chambers and tombs that we'll go check out and see, and look at the sacred symbolism and the sacred geometry of structures and sites around France and Scotland. And Scotland, kind of same thing. There's many megalithic sites there as well, and a lot of medieval history, of course. And I'm really fascinated by the Knights Templar, so I want to go and learn as much as I can in France, where they were really kind of created and really kind of persecuted, and the downfall of them. And there is many Templars that escaped. So the question becomes, where did they go after they fled France? That's another part of the investigation I'll be working on while there. But lots of interesting stuff up in the works. And in the fall, I'll be spending some time in New England, probably be back at America's Stonehenge for a little bit and go explore all the other stone chambers and really mysterious sites in the New England area. So after I return from Europe, that's probably where I'll be. And from that point on, nothing else written in the books yet for sure, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of things coming up, and so definitely stay tuned for what comes next.
Well, once your book comes out, if you're willing to come back on the show, I want to get you on the show, and we'll go over your book and break it down, piece by piece, if you're willing to do that.
Absolutely, I'd love to, and I would love to get into, the book and really what we talk about. I proposed a couple interesting new takes on certain things like dark energy, which spurred the creation, or which spurred the Big Bang, and in turn spurred creation. And I talk about, of course, Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, the church. Talk about secret societies. We talk about, a little bit of everything, and the suppression of women even, but also why people before a certain time period, people always kind of worship the feminine. And so there's a period of time where this shifts. All of a sudden, all the power goes from the women in societies to the men. And so, of course, the central focus of worship goes from being of the feminine to the masculine. So that's another interesting anthropological outlook. When you're looking at societies, why does it shift? Why does it change? Obviously, when women aren't as important and men are more important, that becomes the subject of worship. And so why did that happen? So it's another thing that I think is going to be interesting to talk about in the book and might interest some people. So that the suppression of women has been very prevalent throughout history, religions, and of course the church. So I think it'll be a lot of fun to dive into and to explore the possibilities and some theories onto why it might have happened.
Oh yes, like I said, I can't wait for the book to come out. That's going to be a good read, and plus get you back on the show, and we'll dive into your book and more into, especially you brought up the Knights Templar. That's another area that's always fascinated me, and I try to keep myself well-rounded. I might be in the paranormal world, but I think the paranormal and ancient civilizations and so forth, UFO, crypto, I think it all somehow is linked together.
Well, of course. Everything that occurs on this earth has to be connected somehow, and all life forms are connected. We all, when it comes down to it, we all have biological systems inside of our own bodies that function a certain way for a certain reason, because we are programmed that way by, our biology, by, whatever created us. So for me to say, if people want to say that there might be Bigfoot out there, yeah, the people have seen the evidence. People have had their own sightings, just like ghosts. But the fact of the matter is, we can't definitively say that they exist until we have evidence. But I certainly think that these creatures like Bigfoot could be out there, and I've heard many different accounts from different people firsthand, and even of other creatures like the Jersey Devil and things like that. And it's all interesting to me. I think it's all fascinating. And so I think too, what I really want to do in my career is be able to chase after these myths and legends, and maybe put some data behind it to support it or to debunk it. So I think that's another thing that I'd be interested in doing down the road.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Well, do you have a website or a way people can contact you if they got any questions, thoughts, or concerns they'd like to discuss with you?
Yeah, I do have an email that people can reach me at. That's my first name, Hayley, letter A, and then my last name, Ramsey, Hayley A. Ramsey @gmail.com. If people have any, questions, comments, concerns, tips, or anything they'd like me to personally investigate or look into. But also, I can be followed on Instagram, and my username is, once again, first name Hayley, middle initial A, last name Ramsey. I'm on Facebook, and a website is currently in progress. That's a work in progress right now, but should have one by the end of this year, before the book is on the market.
Okay. Well, Hayley, I appreciate you coming on the show so much. I've had a great time. I've learned so much from you, and I just love your enthusiasm and your young spirit. So you just keep doing what you're doing, girl.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for bringing me on, Rodney. Oh,
you're very welcome. And you have a good night, and you have a great weekend.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I want to thank Hayley for coming on the show. I have nothing but respect for her and the job she's doing. She's a young girl, and she's getting out there getting it. And I hope I live long enough to see big things for her, because she's got big things in her future. And I can't wait to get her back on the show. So after she gets her book written, then finished up, and then we'll dive into that. But next Thursday night, August 1st, our special guest will be author Willie Dalton. So everyone, have a great night. Thank y'all for listening, and y'all have a great weekend, and stay safe. And now let me see if I can find this button. That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services. Thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Phantom Fest 2019 is hosted and sponsored by Black Diamond Paranormal Society, Blog Talk Radio within the Chaos and Elk Garden School Community Ministry. The Phantom Fest is geared for the like-minded and enthusiasts and researchers in the fields of the paranormal, UFOs, cryptozoology, comics, horror films, gamers, cosplay, metaphysical, spiritual, artists, authors, ancient civilizations, tattoo artists, unexplained mysteries, superheroes, FX horror artists, steampunk, costume contest, sci-fi and so much more. The fest offers a unique and interesting outlook on the abnormal. The Phantom Fest will be held on November 2nd, 2019 at the Russell County Conference Center 139, Highland Drive, Lebanon, Virginia. Starting at 10 a.m. and going to 6 p.m. Tickets are $7 per person, ages 0 to 6 are free. 4 tickets can be reduced to $5 per person with 2 non-perishable food items, to be donated to the Elk Garden School Community Ministry to help families during the Thanksgiving season. Any non-perishable food donations will be happily received. Also, we will have a free costume contest for all ages. Guest speakers, returning this year, Bill and Chris Reap of Reap Investigations, Giant researcher Heather Arnold. New to this year's Phantom Fest guest speakers, Dave Spinks, Ron Whitehead, Jake Fife, Chad Zumwalt and Whitney Benson, Amy Green, Barry Gaunt, Cosplay Bridget Baker, CNC Paranormal Investigations, Dennis Estlock, Geologist Girls Heather Taylor and Micah Taylor, Haunted MD Donald Molnar, Lucky Belcamino, Michelle Wagner, and Rebecca Smoog. Special appearances by Cosplay Bridget Baker, Martial Arts Christian Yaya Thompson and Token Nihilist Cosplay, Arthur Stump, Grace N. Lehman, Raphael Bertiz and the Whitebill Ghostbusters. Find us on Facebook Phantom Fest, www.facebook.com/phantomfest. Our website, www.phantomfest.org. Our email, phantomfest1@yahoo.com. For more information, please contact Rodney Shortridge at 276-970-1456 or Josh Mead at 276-880-8900 extension 1259.